Hey, what's up? My name is Jeremy Kilgore. Welcome to Photo by Photo, my photo journey. All right, so let's get into week 3. Week 3, what I thought was going to be a bust for me ended up turning out to be a really cool week. Because I was stuck inside of the house, I had to take pictures of things that I'd already taken pictures of. But using the knowledge that I've gained over the past 3 weeks, I was able to implement those things into my photography. It was cold and rainy, so I couldn't get outside and take pictures of the sunsets and buildings and different things like that like I normally would. So I was forced to take pictures of my guitars, my guitar amps, my speakers, and all those kinds of things. What I did was I took some of my lights from my stage and I positioned them towards my guitars and my amps, and I took pictures that way. Instead of being able to use natural lighting, I used my stage lights, which turned into some really cool looking pictures. And then, being that it was cold and rainy, I wasn't able to get outside. I was forced to take pictures inside of my hospital. But one of the really cool things that happened was while I was trying to take pictures outside of a window, I had to change the settings on my camera phone. I went into Lightroom and I changed the ISO and the shutter speed. I slowed down the shutter speed to 1 second and turned the ISO to 40. But I left those settings on my camera on my way home, and as I was driving, I picked up my camera and I snapped a picture of a building just as a car drove past. And what turned out was a really awesome looking picture. I was able to capture some light streaks, which is the whole reason that I got into photography in the first place. It's light painting. It's really cool. So I'm going to go ahead and show you some of the pictures before and after I edited them, some of the pictures that I took here in the apartment of my guitars and my amps, and some of those really cool pictures that I took of the city, some of that light painting I was talking about. Stick around. All right, so like I said, I was stuck inside my apartment due to the weather, and I wasn't able to get out and take photos like I wanted. So I snapped some pics around the house of my guitars, amps, and a few other things. In this first photo of my guitar, it's nothing special, but I leaned the guitar up against my amp in a way that you could still see the logo. I also placed my stage light on the guitar just to add something cool to the picture. I then brought the photo into Lightroom where I began the editing process. I first worked with the lighting and the white balance to darken the blacks and the shadows. Next, I used a brush tool and highlighted the pick guard so that I could really bring out the reds inside of the color panel. Then I highlighted the neck of the guitar and brought down the luminance and brought up the saturation. This gave the neck a darker, more aged look. After that, I selected the floor next to the guitar and dropped the luminance there as well to really make the red stand out in the guitar. I added some blue to the shadows and finished things off with a slight vignette to the edges. Okay, so here we have a picture of my acoustic guitar. Again, nothing special about this photo, but I chose it because of the natural grain of the rosewood and the bright white binding. I placed the guitar on a gray blanket and used the sun's natural lighting for this photo. I didn't do too much here in the editing phase of this photo because my main focus was the rosewood. I started by adjusting the white balance. I darkened the shadows along with the blacks to add a little bit of depth to the picture. I then used a brush tool inside of Lightroom to select the rosewood siding of the guitar. There I adjusted the reds a bit by bringing down the saturation. Next I moved on to the orange where I dropped the hue, saturation, and luminance, along with the yellows as well. I then bumped up the luminance, and after that I threw some deep blues into the shadows and brought up the warmth to 37 over the full photo, and finished off with a little vignette. This next photo is just a shot of one of my studio monitors. I chose this picture because these speakers have been good to me and held up quite well for the past 10 years now. I also like their sleek black look. I shot this pic using both a selfie light along with the overhead lighting in my room. A lot was done here in the editing process. I upped the exposure to brighten the entire photo. Then I boosted the contrast and dropped the highlights. I didn't mess with the shadows, whites, or blacks here too much though, because the contrast did enough. Inside the color panel, I brought down the hue on the reds while giving a slight boost to their saturation and brought the luminance down just a bit. I pushed the hue and saturation all the way up in the oranges and brought the luminance up to 42. For the light blue, I brought the hue and luminance down a bit and upped the saturation. The same went for the dark blues. Then I hit things off with a slight vignette and a little bit of magenta over the whole photo. In this picture I took of the city, I was a little challenged because the windows are double paned. I had to find the darkest spot in the hallway and take the picture from there, while placing the camera flat against the window. I also knew that being dark out, I needed to make some adjustments to my settings, so I opened the camera inside of Lightroom where I could play around with the shutter speed and ISO. I slowed the shutter speed down to 1 second and set the ISO at 40 and captured a really nice picture of the city. Then inside Lightroom, I cropped the image to take out the white bottom. I then selected the sky and changed the hue to a dark blue. I upped the luminance of the purples to make that light in the distance glow just a bit. Then using the brush tool, I selected the windows of the walkway and boosted the blues to match the sky. Afterwards, I brought up the exposure some just to brighten the photo and bring out some detail in the buildings. Lastly, on my way home, I drove by a nice-looking building standing alone in a field. I decided to snap a quick photo in hopes that I'd be able to edit it and make it look cool, but I still had the settings set the same as I did in the previous picture. However, a car passed by just as I took the photo, and with the shutter speed set at 1 second and the ISO at 40, I was able to capture the light streaks from the taillights of the car. I opened the photo in Lightroom and began focusing on the light streaks right away to see if I could bring them out any. I adjusted the hue and saturation of the reds and brought up the luminance to really bring them out. I then brought up the contrast to really make them stand out against the building. I then selected the sky where I changed the hue to a deep blue and added a bit of blue to the shadows to really make those reds stand out even more in the photo. It was really cool. All right, so there you go. I showed you some before and after shots that I took of the city, some before. I showed you some light streaks that I took of some cars going by the big. My amps. Showed you some light streaks. Man. All right, so there you go. I showed you some before and after shots that I took of the city, some before and after shots that I took around my home of my guitar, my amps, using some stage lights. I showed you some light streaks and some other really cool things. I hope that you'll like and subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell for more updates. Thank you very much.